Have you ever wondered how a single act of courage can change the course of an entire nation? In a time when Israel was under constant oppression, one woman stood up, not just as a leader, but as a prophetess, a warrior, and a symbol of unwavering faith. Her name was Deborah, and her story of faith, courage, and victory for Israel holds lessons that resonate even today. Join us as we dive into the untold story of Deborah the judge and discover how her trust in God led to one of the most remarkable victories in biblical history. Israel's history during the time of the Judges was marked by periods of turmoil, foreign oppression, and spiritual waywardness. After settling in the Promised Land, the Israelites often fell into cycles of disobedience, turning away from God and facing the consequences. Each time they did, their enemies would overrun them and the people would cry out for deliverance. It was during these critical moments that God raised up judges to lead the nation. These judges weren't kings or rulers in the traditional sense, but divinely appointed leaders, each one tasked with restoring order, providing guidance, and delivering Israel from its oppressors. Unlike monarchs, these judges were not chosen by lineage or human appointment, but were divinely selected, often coming from unexpected backgrounds. Some were warriors, others were prophets, and each played a unique role in the history of Israel. The period of the Judges was one where leadership was fluid and authority came from faith in God rather than established political systems. It was a time where victory for Israel depended not on military might, but on spiritual obedience and trust in divine leadership. The role of a judge, therefore, wasn't just about military victory, but also about spiritual leadership. Judges had to remind the people of God's covenant and steer them back toward faithfulness. Their primary responsibility was to bring the Israelites back to their commitment to God, and this often came through miraculous victories against insurmountable odds. The successes of these judges were a direct result of their faith in God's promises and their willingness to follow His guidance in the face of overwhelming danger. One of the most striking aspects of the time of the Judges is how God used unexpected individuals to lead. It wasn't always the strongest warrior or the most influential tribe leader that was chosen. God often selected those who seemed unlikely, proving that victory for Israel didn't rest in human ability, but in divine intervention. In this chaotic period, the Judges were a beacon of hope, often called upon in desperate situations where only a miraculous turnaround could save the nation. As the nation was constantly threatened by external enemies, the judges were tasked with rallying the people, providing wisdom, and often leading them into battle. This was not just a physical battle, but a spiritual one, reminding the Israelites of their unique identity as God's chosen people and calling them back to obedience. It was in this context that the stage was set for one of the most remarkable figures in Israel's history, Deborah. In a time when leadership was overwhelmingly male, Deborah's rise as a judge and prophetess was nothing short of revolutionary. Israel, during the era of the Judges, was a nation in turmoil, constantly oppressed by neighboring enemies and lacking strong, centralized leadership. Judges were raised up by God to lead His people through these dark times, and Deborah's appointment to this role stood as a testament to her exceptional wisdom and faith. Her authority wasn't based on birthright or lineage. It was earned through her spiritual discernment and deep connection with God. Deborah's dual role as both judge and prophetess gave her a unique place in Israel's society. As a judge, she offered legal rulings and settled disputes among the Israelites. Her judgment was sought after because of her fairness, insight, and ability to listen, not just to people's words, but to God's guidance. Under the palm of Deborah, where she held court, people traveled from all over to seek her wisdom, and her rulings brought peace and justice during a chaotic period. Deborah's wisdom was divinely inspired, making her leadership invaluable to the Israelites. As a prophetess, Deborah wasn't merely a legal authority. she was a spiritual leader as well. This role meant she had a direct line to God, receiving and delivering his messages to the people. She didn't simply interpret the law, she interpreted God's will for the nation. Her prophetic gift allowed her to see beyond the immediate problems of Israel and into the spiritual realities that were shaping their fate. It's a role that demanded not just intelligence, but deep spiritual sensitivity. Deborah's leadership was especially groundbreaking because she operated within a society that traditionally viewed men as the primary leaders. Despite this, Deborah was not only accepted, but respected and revered by the people. This speaks volumes about her character and the way God's hand was clearly upon her. Her influence transcended societal norms, showing that when God appoints someone, no human-made boundaries can stand in the way of that person fulfilling their destiny. When God revealed to Deborah that it was time for Israel to rise against their oppressors, she didn't hesitate. She called upon Barak, a respected military commander, to lead Israel's army. But even in this moment of military strategy, Deborah's spiritual leadership was front and center. She prophesied the victory, but made it clear that the glory of defeating the enemy would not go to Barak. It would go to a woman. This declaration not only demonstrated her prophetic foresight, but also her deep understanding of how God works through the unexpected. Deborah's rise to prominence was not about challenging the societal structure just for the sake of it. It was about following God's call and leading his people with faith and wisdom. She didn't seek power or position for herself. She sought to serve the nation and fulfill God's will. Deborah's humility and leadership is as inspiring as her courage. She always pointed the people back to God as their true deliverer, never taking credit for herself. Through her example, Deborah teaches us that true leadership isn't about status, gender, or societal norms. It's about obedience to God's calling. Her life is a reminder that when God chooses someone, he equips them fully for the task ahead, no matter how unconventional that choice might seem. Deborah's story continues to inspire not just women, but anyone who doubts their ability to lead or serve in God's kingdom. Her rise to leadership was a triumph of faith over societal limitations, and her legacy is one of trust, courage, and divine wisdom. Deborah's role as a judge and prophetess was not just limited to settling disputes. God had a much greater purpose for her leadership. When the time came for Israel to break free from the oppression of the Canaanite king Jabin and his fearsome general Sisera, Deborah knew she had to act. God gave her a prophetic word that it was time for Israel to rise up, and she immediately called upon Barak, a respected military leader, to lead the charge. But Barak's response was unexpected, highlighting a key dynamic in this chapter of Israel's history. Barak's hesitation is one of the most interesting elements of the story. When Deborah called him to gather the troops and lead them into battle, he didn't refuse, but he did place a condition on his obedience. He would only go if Deborah accompanied him. This moment is significant because it reveals both Barak's respect for Deborah and her vital role in the spiritual leadership of the nation. Barak recognized that victory wouldn't come from military strategy alone. It would come through the guidance of God, and Deborah was the one through whom that guidance flowed. Deborah agreed to accompany Barak, but she also delivered a prophecy that must have surprised him. The glory of the victory would not belong to Barak, but to a woman. This prophetic declaration set the stage for one of the most unexpected twists in the story. While Barak would lead the army, it would be a woman who ultimately delivered the decisive blow to Israel's enemy. This prophecy underscored the theme of divine reversal that runs throughout the Bible, where God often uses the unexpected to achieve his purposes. The battle itself was fierce, with Sisera's army boasting 900 iron chariots, a formidable force that seemed unstoppable. But Deborah's faith in God's plan never wavered. She urged Barak to move forward, reminding him that the Lord had already gone ahead of them. This spiritual leadership, grounded in prophetic certainty, was the key to Israel's victory. Barak led the charge, and just as Deborah had prophesied, God threw Sisera's army into confusion, leading to their defeat. Sisera, the feared general, fled the battlefield on foot, abandoning his troops in desperation. This moment marked the beginning of the fulfillment of Deborah's prophecy. Sisera's downfall would not come at the hands of Barak or any of Israel's soldiers, but through the bravery and cunning of another woman, Jael. The battle against Sisera was not just a military victory, it was a victory of faith, obedience, and the power of God working through unexpected people. The relationship between Deborah and Barak throughout this narrative is one of mutual respect, but it also highlights the different roles they played in bringing about God's victory. Barak was the military leader, but it was Deborah's spiritual leadership and prophetic guidance that paved the way for the triumph. Barak's reliance on Deborah's presence shows us that true leadership often involves recognizing where others have strengths that complement our own. In this case, Barak knew that without Deborah's prophetic insight, the battle would be far more challenging. This part of Deborah's story reminds us that victory doesn't always come from might or power, but from obedience to God's plan. The battle against Sisera wasn't just about defeating a physical enemy. It was about demonstrating that when God calls his people to act, he provides the strength and strategy needed to win. Deborah's prophetic word ensured that the Israelites would not only win the battle, but also remember that it was God who orchestrated their victory through unexpected means. In this decisive moment, Deborah's leadership transcended traditional boundaries, showing that God's plans are not limited by human expectations. Her call to Barak and her unwavering faith in God's promise made it clear that the battle belonged to the Lord, and no earthly force could stand against his will. This powerful combination of military action and prophetic leadership ensured that Israel would experience a victory that would echo through the generations. Deborah's courage was not just demonstrated in her prophetic words or leadership from a distance. She was physically present in the midst of one of Israel's greatest battles. Her decision to accompany Barak to the battlefield was not only an act of obedience to God's calling, but a powerful demonstration of her unwavering faith. For many leaders, issuing commands from a safe distance might have been the expected approach, but Deborah showed that true leadership is not afraid to step into the fray when necessary. Her presence on the battlefield added a spiritual dimension to the fight. The Israelites weren't just relying on their military strength or strategy, they were relying on the assurance that God was with them, guiding their every move through Deborah. Barak's insistence that Deborah accompany him into battle shows how integral her role was, not only as a judge, but as a spiritual beacon in a time of great uncertainty. With Deborah by his side, Barak and the Israelites knew they were not alone. When the day of the battle arrived, Deborah stood firm, even as the opposing forces, led by the feared general Sisera, prepared to unleash their iron chariots. The sight of Sisera's army must have been overwhelming, 900 chariots equipped for destruction, bearing down on the Israelites. But Deborah didn't flinch. Instead, she issued a rallying cry that still echoes in the hearts of believers today. Go! This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? This declaration wasn't just a motivational speech. It was a prophetic proclamation that the battle was already won in the spiritual realm. Deborah's courage in declaring victory before the battle had even begun demonstrated her absolute trust in God's promise. She didn't doubt for a moment that the Lord would fulfill his word. Her confidence in God's power infused Barak and the Israelite soldiers with the courage they needed to charge forward despite the overwhelming odds. As the battle raged, the Israelites experienced firsthand the fulfillment of God's promise through Deborah. Sisera's army, though formidable, was thrown into confusion, and the tide of the battle quickly turned in favor of Israel. What seemed like an insurmountable challenge became a decisive victory, all because Deborah had the faith to trust in God's plan and the courage to act on that faith. Her presence on the battlefield was not merely symbolic, it was essential to the victory. Deborah's courage also showed the Israelites that true leadership goes beyond issuing commands. It involves standing with your people in the heat of the fight. Her willingness to be there alongside Barak and the troops spoke volumes about her character and the strength of her convictions. She wasn't just a judge who made decisions from a place of safety. She was a leader who believed so deeply in God's promise that she was willing to put herself in harm's way to see it fulfilled. This kind of courage didn't just inspire Barak and the soldiers, it continues to inspire believers today. Deborah's example teaches us that faith isn't passive, it's active. It requires us to step out in courage, even when the odds seem stacked against us. And just as Deborah knew that God had already gone ahead of them into battle, we can trust that He goes ahead of us in our own struggles and challenges. In the end, Deborah's courage was a crucial element in securing the victory for Israel. Her faith and fearlessness allowed her to lead in a way that transcended the limitations of her time, proving that God's power can work through anyone who is willing to trust Him completely. The battle may have been fought with swords and chariots, but the true victory was won through the spiritual leadership and courage that Deborah embodied. As Sisera fled the battlefield, exhausted and desperate after his crushing defeat, he sought refuge in what seemed like a safe place. Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, welcomed him into her tent with the promise of protection. This moment, seemingly ordinary, would soon become one of the most pivotal events in Israel's history. While Sisera believed he was safe, Jael's intentions were far from what they appeared. Jael's actions stand out as one of the most unexpected and decisive in the entire story. Unlike Deborah, who was a recognized leader, Jael was an outsider, a woman from a neutral tribe, seemingly removed from the conflicts of Israel. And yet, in this moment, she became the instrument through which Deborah's prophecy would be fulfilled. Deborah had declared that the glory of the battle would not go to Barak, but to a woman, and it was Jael, not Deborah, who would deliver the final blow to Israel's enemy. After offering Sisera a drink and a place to rest, Jael waited until he had fallen into a deep sleep. Then, with incredible courage, she took a tent peg and hammer and drove it through Sisera's temple, killing him instantly. This act, shocking in its brutality, was the means through which God's victory over Israel's enemies was finalized. Jael's decisive action brought peace to Israel and secured her place in the story of God's deliverance. What makes Jael's role even more remarkable is the way she defied the expectations of her time. Women in the ancient world were often seen as passive or secondary figures in the grand narratives of war and politics. But Jael's actions shattered these assumptions. She wasn't a warrior, and she didn't have a title like Deborah, yet her bravery and resourcefulness were just as critical in delivering Israel from its oppressor. Jael's courage, much like Deborah's, stemmed from a deep sense of purpose and conviction. She saw the opportunity to act in a way that would change the course of Israel's history, and she seized it, even though it came with significant personal risk. In that moment, Jael became the embodiment of God's promise to deliver His people, using the most unlikely of individuals to fulfill His plan. Sisera's death at the hands of Jael also serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictability of God's methods. Just as Deborah had prophesied, the victory would come through a woman, but it wasn't in the way that anyone expected. The triumph didn't come through a dramatic battle scene, but through an act of quiet and calculated bravery. Jael's role challenges our assumptions about who God can use to accomplish His will, reminding us that no one is too insignificant or unqualified in His eyes. Jael's story has continued to inspire generations, not only because of her courage, but because of the way it highlights God's ability to work through anyone, regardless of their status or background. Her actions, though violent, were seen as righteous because they aligned with God's plan to free Israel from oppression. She played a key role in fulfilling the prophetic words of Deborah and securing peace for God's people. In reflecting on Jael's role, we are reminded of the importance of being ready to act when called upon, even in the most unexpected ways. Her story encourages us to trust in God's timing and to recognize that He often works through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Just like Jael, we may find ourselves in situations where we are called to step up and be part of God's unfolding plan, even when it seems beyond our abilities or expectations. Jael's unexpected heroism teaches us that sometimes victory comes not through grand gestures or mighty battles, but through small, courageous acts of faith. In her moment of decision, Jael demonstrated that true strength comes from trusting in God's purpose, even when the path to victory is far from conventional. After the victory over Sisera and the Canaanite forces, Deborah's leadership took on a new dimension through her song of praise, which is recorded in Judges 5. This song wasn't just a celebration of military success. It was a poetic reflection on God's power, Israel's deliverance, and the role of courageous individuals who played a part in the victory. Deborah's song stands as one of the oldest pieces of Hebrew poetry, filled with symbolism and spiritual insight. The song begins by praising the Lord for the willing leaders and volunteers in Israel who stepped up during a time of great need. Deborah acknowledged that the victory was not just a result of human effort, but of divine intervention. In her lyrics, she praised God as the true deliverer of Israel, highlighting the importance of recognizing God's hand in every triumph. Deborah's song was not about personal glory, but about giving credit to God for the outcome of the battle. What makes Deborah's song so unique is the way it captured the emotional and spiritual impact of the victory. It wasn't just a recounting of events, but a reminder of Israel's relationship with God. She recalled the suffering and oppression that Israel endured before the battle and contrasted it with the peace that God's victory would bring. Her words were meant to inspire hope and encourage the people to continue trusting in God, even in the darkest times. Deborah's song also emphasized the importance of those who responded to God's call. While she praised the tribes of Israel who fought valiantly, she also rebuked those who remained passive and did not come to the aid of their brothers. This element of the song highlights a key theme in the story of Deborah, the call to action. Deborah's leadership was about more than just strategy. It was about rallying the people to stand up for what was right and to trust in God's plan. The inclusion of Jael in Deborah's song is another powerful aspect. Jael, the woman who killed Sisera, is praised as blessed among women for her bravery and decisive action. Deborah honored Jael's role in fulfilling God's prophecy and delivering Israel, showing that this victory was not just the result of military might, but of individual courage and faith. Jael's actions, though unconventional, were seen as part of God's divine plan, and Deborah's song elevated her to the status of a hero. Deborah's song also has a prophetic quality. As she recounted the battle and the victory, she spoke of the future peace that would come to Israel as a result of God's intervention. Her words pointed forward to a time of rest and security, reminding the Israelites that this victory was part of a larger narrative of God's covenant faithfulness. The song became a tool for teaching and reminding future generations of God's deliverance and the importance of trusting Him in every battle. The significance of Deborah's song lies not only in its content, but in its purpose. Songs of victory were common in ancient times, serving as a way to preserve history and celebrate achievements. However, Deborah's song goes beyond mere celebration. It was a spiritual declaration. Through this song, Deborah solidified her legacy as both a judge and a prophetess, a leader who not only guided Israel through a difficult time, but also led them in worship and praise. In many ways, Deborah's song encapsulates the heart of her leadership. She was a woman of action and faith, deeply committed to leading Israel, not only in battle, but in their relationship with God. Her song became a lasting testament to the power of trusting in God's promises and stepping into the roles He calls us to, no matter how challenging or unexpected they may be. What stands out most about Deborah's leadership is how unconventional it was for her time. In an era when women were rarely in positions of authority, Deborah not only served as a judge, but also as a prophetess. Her ability to combine spiritual insight with practical wisdom made her a unique and effective leader. People came to her for judgment because they trusted her to deliver decisions that were fair, righteous, and in line with God's will. Deborah's influence went beyond the battlefield. Her leadership encouraged unity among the tribes of Israel, rallying them together against a common enemy. This was no small feat, as the tribes were often divided and prone to internal conflict. By bringing them together to fight under God's direction, Deborah strengthened the bond between the tribes and reinforced their collective identity as God's chosen people. Moreover, Deborah's leadership had a ripple effect on future generations. Her example showed that God could raise up anyone, regardless of gender or social status, to lead His people. This was a significant shift in the way leadership was understood in Israel. Deborah's success as a leader paved the way for future leaders to be chosen based on their faithfulness to God, rather than on traditional expectations of power and authority. The 40 years of peace that followed Deborah's victory were a direct result of her faith in God's plan and her ability to inspire that same faith in others. She didn't just lead with strategy, she led with a deep reliance on God's guidance. This spiritual leadership was crucial in maintaining peace, as it reminded the Israelites that their true strength came from their relationship with God, not just from military might. Deborah's impact also extended to the personal lives of those she led. Her example of faith and courage resonated deeply with the people of Israel, particularly the women who saw in her a model of what was possible through faith in God. Deborah broke through societal norms, showing that leadership was not about power or status, but about obedience to God's call. This empowered others to step into roles they may have otherwise thought were unattainable. The peace that followed Deborah's leadership wasn't just the absence of war, it was a time of spiritual renewal for Israel. Under her guidance, the people were reminded of their covenant with God and the importance of following His commands. Deborah's influence helped to restore a sense of purpose and direction to a nation that had been lost in cycles of disobedience and oppression. Deborah's leadership also served as a foreshadowing of the type of leaders God would continue to raise up for Israel. She was a precursor to the kings and prophets who would come after her, embodying the characteristics of a leader who was not only wise, but also deeply connected to God. Her ability to lead both in times of war and peace set a standard for future leaders who would follow in her footsteps. Deborah's story offers timeless lessons that resonate with modern believers, especially in a world that often undervalues faith-based leadership. One of the most striking lessons is that leadership is not confined to a specific gender, social status, or position. Deborah's rise to leadership in a male-dominated society demonstrates that God equips and calls whomever He chooses, often defying societal expectations. This reminds us that faith and obedience to God can break through any barrier, be it cultural, personal, or institutional. Another key lesson from Deborah's story is the importance of courage in the face of overwhelming challenges. Deborah led Israel at a time when they were oppressed by a powerful enemy, and it would have been easy to retreat in fear. Yet her faith in God's promise gave her the courage to act decisively, to call Barak to lead the army, and to go into battle herself. In today's world, where challenges may look different but are no less daunting, Deborah's courage inspires believers to act boldly in faith, trusting in God's plan. Deborah's reliance on God's guidance is another critical takeaway. Throughout her leadership, she consistently sought God's direction, whether through her role as a judge or a prophetess. This serves as a powerful reminder that true wisdom and successful leadership come from seeking God's will, not relying on human understanding alone. In a world where many leaders rely on their own strength or the advice of others, Deborah's story reminds us to look to God first for direction and clarity. Her collaboration with Barak also highlights the importance of working with others, even when we feel called to lead. Deborah didn't try to fight the battle alone. She called on Barak, knowing that victory would require a united effort. This teaches us that while God may call us to lead, He also provides others to stand alongside us. Leadership isn't about doing it all on our own. It's about recognizing the strengths in others and working together to achieve God's purposes. Moreover, Deborah's story illustrates the power of prophecy and faith in God's promises. Her prophetic declaration that victory would come, though the glory would go to a woman, showed her absolute trust in God's word. Even when the situation seemed impossible, Deborah didn't waver in her faith. This unwavering trust is something modern believers can draw from, especially when facing their own spiritual battles. It reminds us that God's promises are true, even when the path ahead looks uncertain. Deborah also teaches us the value of giving God the glory for our successes. After the battle was won, Deborah didn't claim the victory for herself. She composed a song that praised God for delivering Israel. This shows the importance of humility in leadership and the need to recognize that all victories, whether personal or collective, are ultimately from God. Her example encourages believers today to celebrate their successes, not with pride, but with gratitude to God. One of the most powerful lessons from Deborah's story is about the role of women in God's kingdom. Her leadership, alongside Jael's decisive action in defeating Sisera, shows that God's calling and empowerment are not limited by gender. This challenges modern believers to rethink traditional roles and embrace the idea that God can use anyone, regardless of societal norms, to fulfill His purposes. Deborah's story encourages both men and women to step into their God-given roles with confidence, knowing that God equips those He calls. Deborah's life, her leadership, and her faith continue to inspire believers today. Her story is a testament to the power of God working through individuals who are willing to trust Him, even when the odds seem impossible. It encourages all of us to lead with courage, to trust in God's guidance, and to step into the roles God has prepared for us, knowing that through Him we can achieve great things. As we reflect on the incredible story of Deborah, it's clear that her unwavering faith and courage weren't just for her time. They're timeless lessons for us all. Deborah's leadership reminds us that God can use anyone, regardless of status or circumstance, to fulfill His purposes. So how can her story inspire you today? What obstacles are you facing where faith and boldness are needed? Just as Deborah trusted in God to bring victory for Israel, we too can rely on His guidance in our own spiritual battles. Now, before you leave, take a moment to think about your own spiritual growth. Are you longing for a deeper connection with God? If so, check out our ebook, 30 Habits to Draw Closer to God, available in the comments below. This guide is designed to help you establish daily habits that will transform your walk with God. Imagine living with more peace, purpose, and fulfillment, knowing you're aligned with His will. The spiritual growth you seek is closer than you think. Begin today by taking that first step. And don't forget, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a message of hope in the comments. Let's continue this journey together, learning and growing in our faith. See you in the next video.